Bonjour, bienvenue à...
Good afternoon, welcome. We are very pleased to have you with us in this beautiful city of Nantes. We are gathered for the Nantes Innovation Forum, and in this occasion, the newspaper Le Monde is organizing 3 sessions around the topics crisis and civic innovation. 3 different sessions that you can be part of while interacting with our speakers. We'll have 40 minutes debates and 20 minutes Q&A with the speakers so that you can raise your questions pragmatically. You can watch the conferences, not innovationforum.fr, or on the Le Monde événement Facebook page. 3 main opportunities this afternoon to give you key elements to understand the crisis we're going through, the original initiatives that arise from it, and to try and open new avenues to cancel out the impacts of the crisis. Understanding, managing, anticipating crisis, these are the 3 main topics of our sessions. During our first round table, we're going to try and understand the mechanisms which make crises arise. It is key to understand the nature of their origins and the mechanisms the processes that make them arise. The historical, systemic, and societal points of view give us perspectives to understand the crisis that we have been faced with, that we are facing, and that we will have to face in the future. So, I am very pleased to present Cecile Valadier, one of our speakers. Good afternoon, Cécile. Thank you for your participation. You are in Paris. You are joint manager of the economic and public policy diagnostics of the French Development Agency. You led research on the finance of development, the funding of development, and before that, you were a senior economist in the World Bank. Jean Garrigues, good afternoon. Welcome. You are in Orleans. No, in Paris, actually. Some change. So you're in Paris. Welcome. You are contemporary history teacher in the Orleans University. You chair the political and parliamentary history chair, and you work for the Parlement journal. Our next guest, Mr. Peretti-Watel. I think you're connected from Nice. That's right. Welcome. You're a sociologist. Risk and health sociology. You work for the INSERM, which is the Health and Medical Research National Institute, and you you are in charge of a team working on risk management and dilemmas relating to their management, especially related to the infectious diseases service in Marseille. So our last guest is excused. They had an unforeseen event to deal with. She will be with us in thoughts, but not digitally. So to begin with, each of you will provide us with your definition of a crisis. If you have 30 seconds to define a crisis, what do you say? A crisis is a moment when a system, to me, a political system, or as a broader vision, an ecosystem, the way a society functions, is undergoing a trauma, whether it be economic, social, wars were a major crisis, for instance, and is therefore totally shaken. But actually, I think these crises are actually symptoms of issues that were pre-existing before the crisis within the society concerned. And I think it's true for any crisis under any regime at any time in history. Do you have the same definition, or is it different? Our health crisis, 1 minute. For the general public, it's a threat that comes up suddenly and makes a lot of casualties. For those working on health crisis, key characteristics is the lack of certainty, the number of uncertainty, the level of threat, for instance, because a lot of health crises do not lead to as many casualties as feared in 1996, or the H1N1 in the 2000s, for instance. And since March, at every level, we still don't really know how this virus is passed on. Is it mutating or not? Will our health system survive this crisis, and so on? And today, we don't know if we'll come up with a vaccine or any treatment. We don't know if the vaccines will work and if people will comply to vaccination plans. So these are uncertainties that make the crisis management even more complicated. Thank you, Patrick, for this definition. Cecile Valadier, what is your definition of crisis? In the economy is a sudden slowdown of the economy, with a slowdown and the total of wealth produced in the year of the crisis being much lower than before. That is translated into job losses, bankruptcies, and so on. Thank you, you three. So the word crisis is dense, complex. Jean Garrigues, as a historian, where do democratic crises come from? The democratic model is rather recent in global history. There have been instances of democratic systems in antique Greece, but they didn't last for very long and were only for a selected part of the population. So democracy started really being applied in Europe and around the world in the 19th century. So this model is still fragile, new, and it always struggled to take in the masses in a Marxist sense of the term. So liberal democracies, parliamentary democracies, do not always fulfill the needs of a majority of the population. And this model is shaken by major traumas like world wars, for instance. The interpreter cannot hear properly because the sound is really, really not good. So we can see that this democratic system that spent the 19th century trying to deploy is easily shaken. And alternative systems that were totalitarian in Germany, Italy, the USSR, or authoritarian in Austria and elsewhere, all around Europe. I'm sorry, the sound is really, really cut regularly and I cannot hear full sentences. So, democracy is undergoing shocks, whether military shocks, economic shocks that make it unstable, that destabilize the situation. So, democracies that have existed for about 150 years or so, we are faced with a second major crisis that democracy is undergoing in our world. Cecile Valadier, you heard Mr. Garrigues. What is your point of view on the origin of democracy crisis, and have you identified common points, common generators, common factors? Well, I'm more focused on economic crisis. First of all, they are a normal aspect of economy cycles. We have never observed a full-on growth, continuous growth with no interruption. It is part of a cycle. There are growth moments and recession periods. Financial crises have common factors in their origins, and they're often identified afterwards by the economists. Too much debt, indebtedness of states, or of businesses, when there's a disconnect of the assets of a company and the value of these assets, or lack of cash flow in the system, as in 2008. But financial crises are not the only type of economic crisis. The destruction of businesses due to natural disasters, a health crisis like the one we're faced with today. So exogenous factors that are imposed on the system as it is. And the crisis we're faced with right now is unprecedented because of its scale and the number of countries hit at the same time, because it is a global crisis. Patrick Peretti-Watel, have you spotted triggers of these crises? If we look at the genesis of the crisis, there are things similar to what Jean Garrigues said in his introduction. That is to say that often a health crisis is a shock between a trigger, an unprecedented circumstance, and a context which is favorable to the birth of this crisis. So what happened in Beirut last summer is a great illustration, because we don't know how that storage facility exploded, but the fact that that product was stored for years there, it means that the international maritime trade system is undergoing structural issues that make this situation possible. So we talked about the health crisis in France, for instance. The blood crisis, the so-called blood crisis, is the crossing of the HIV virus and blood stock management issues. So the mad cow disease crisis in France, the prion actually revealed the weaknesses in agricultural system, deregulations that made it legal not to overheat the feed, and therefore led to the crisis. So given the unpredictable aspect of a crisis, of course, because there's an unforecast event that actually meets with crisis. For example, with the elderly, we are faced with issues in France, as well as our health system, our hospital systems and equipment, for instance, and then the virus came and highlighted all these weaknesses. We know that the fast movement of viruses is closely linked to human activities. SARS-CoV-2 traveled much faster than the Spanish flu in 1919. So there are unforeseen circumstances that are extraordinary, but some of the context is due to political, economic, and social situations that are pre-existing. And that's why I'm saying that these events are actually just highlighting weaknesses in the system. We'll get back to that later. Mr. Garrigues, according to you, do crises always impact the way democracy works or not? We'll get back to that later. Cecile Valadier, in the economic sphere, do you feel that every era, every period has its own set of crises? Well, there are common factors, as said before, and I agree with what Patrick said. There are weaknesses in the system that are met with a trigger, and it's always difficult to anticipate. But to me, the processes can vary. Economists try to characterize the various monetary crises from the 70s to the 90s by identifying them in first generation, second, third generation crisis with a doom and gloom vision, because every crisis came with a new set of explanations. But it enables us to spot vulnerabilities for the future. Today, I think the interconnection of economies at the global level, as well as the financial markets, generates special effects that are very easy triggers for crisis because of the co-financing between countries. International investors can have a panic attack that impacts the entire market, and that can trigger crisis quite easily. On the other hand, triggers can be common. The oil prices falling always generate tensions in the economy that can lead to crisis. So unforeseen, unprecedented reasons like what we're faced with this year, or very common situations that show structural vulnerabilities, both can happen. What we're faced with today is unprecedented, but it doesn't mean it will not happen again. I'm not saying that history repeats itself all the time, because we keep learning from previous crises. We analyze these crises. We try and understand the processes that led to these crises. We try to understand the links, and we try to adapt our economic reactions to avoid repeating the same mistakes as in the past. Thank you, Cécile, for these explanations. Do we have Mr. Garrigues back in the conference? Technology issues. So he's not reconnected yet. Patrick, Peretti-Watel. Do you feel that crises are coming with opportunities for those who know how to seize them? Regarding health crisis, I can say yes. For health crisis, there are economic, social, political causes and consequences that lead to new opportunities. especially political opportunities, but not only. Firstly, because a crisis will lead to chaos and confusion, and these are exceptional circumstances, emergency situations in which it's easier to implement measures that would not have been accepted before. Teleworking, for example. Working from home was not accepted in the French society before. It was an innovation that pre-existed but was not well accepted, and it will probably develop a lot and sustainably in France in the long term. The way people see this type of work will have changed because of the crisis. So there is chaos, confusion from the crisis that justifies extreme measures like the emergency state, so-called emergency state measures. In the Middle Ages, when there was a plague, there was a vision of the writers of the time that talk about the decline of society and so on and so forth. But there was a real specific political situation during plagues because there was a need to control the population very strictly to manage the epidemics. And it resembles what we're seeing today, actually, because the lockdown was a measure taken. The application, the smartphone application, Stop COVID, was one of the same. So there are means to control the population implemented and that will leave traces. I mean, they will have consequences, secondary effects. It's not something new. I think in the early 19th century, there was an epidemic of cholera in Paris. This is why the city decided to refurbish its entire urban system. And the entire architecture was rethought, also because of revolutionary reasons. The cities were broadened, etc. The roads, sorry, were broadened. So this is about controlling the population, and these are innovations that are not always progressive, actually. Cécile, do you agree with what has just been said? And do you think that in the economic sphere, a crisis can be synonym of opportunity? I think it can be the case. For instance, the recovery plans that were announced to boost the recovery of the business activity is an example. We'll have to question the quality of these measures. Do they meet with the needs of an ambition to be more resilient to future crises, for instance? Systemic crises like climate change will come up. So the recovery process are not really taking into account the environmental aspects. Actually, they can actually represent a regression on biodiversity, climate issues, and so on. So there is an opening space for debate. What are the economic answers to these challenges? Investing in targeted spheres like the green transition, for instance, can boost the economy while improving our economy's resilience to future crises. So I think it's a new opportunity to have a debate on the implementation of policies that would meet with these new challenges. So we need public support, political support. We need the political authorities to make the right decisions in these regards. After the crisis, we could see that billions of euros were promised to help the economy, and it shows a political will to target the crisis, but it also must tackle climate change. Patrick, do you feel that solutions to crisis must go through innovations, no matter what type of innovation, technical, of governance, of society. Not necessarily. It may be a bit dark, but often health crises, actually the threat that they trigger, disappears as it arises. A plague in the Middle Age didn't last for centuries. They always disappeared. And it was not thanks to human innovations. Of course, these days, and for the past few months, we have deployed huge efforts to try and develop a new vaccine, for instance. So maybe it will lead to new improvements, maybe not only a one-shot vaccine, but also several vaccines that will be enabled to be produced faster no matter what crisis we're faced with in the future. But I'm not convinced that innovation is necessary. What would be more efficient would be innovations that happen between the crisis to actually not worsen but improve the structural context. So innovations do not always make the crisis go away, but maybe innovations between crises can actually dampen the next crisis. In the economic sphere, what do you think? Is innovation a key element to get rid of a crisis, to come out of a crisis? I think it's not necessary. I think the experience learned from the past crisis are key. Implementing such or such policy and the result it had can guide the next political steps. But the transition moments between crises are better moments to think in terms of innovation, to change the way the system works, and they can be actually supported by by economic policies. Patrick mentioned teleworking, working from home. I think these practices could be extended to after the crisis. The decreased international mobility, the use of international traveling can be questioned and can evolve. It's not a huge innovation, but it's a change that is made possible in the aftermath of the crisis.
Patrick, have you come across various factors which could allow to slow down the crisis and avoid it to expand too much? Well, yes. Well, there is a big issue here. You see, I usually, when I talk about crisis, I talk about health crisis, right? And well, we'll see if in a few years from now, if what we've done for this crisis has been successful or not. But what I see is that managing such a crisis requires measures that are going to require the people to do various things and to not do other things, right? So the public needs to be involved in what is being done. So sometimes you have to force people with various measures, but obviously the best thing is to require as much as possible on the willingness of the people, right? The people need to trust in the public authorities when asked to do this or that, right? And when this or that has been decided to deal with the health crisis in order to avoid it becoming a political crisis, and this is in a way what we are experiencing in France, because we see that a lot of people are challenging the measures that are being decided by the authorities, and yeah, when it comes back to what I said, is that this trust of the people in the authorities needs to be backed by the authorities themselves, and how they use this trust that is put in them. And what we see is that quite often in such situations, the local authorities are completely put aside and not really included in decision making. And yeah, so I believe that in order to avoid a health crisis to become a political crisis, there needs to be some kind of decentralized management of the crisis, and we need to come up with various ways to deal with the crisis that involve involves the public in different ways, and namely the local authorities. And so because and for instance, an example, is transparency the best way of managing the crisis? I don't know, because we've seen that the people have challenged at time quite have challenged the announcements made by the government. But anyway, yeah. Well, Cecile Valadier, how can you answer this question? So, in order to avoid a crisis from expanding too much, even though, well, you're not really involved in health crisis, but more economic crisis, what can be done? Well, we've seen that the measures that have been deployed by the government in order to support the economy, namely following lockdown, well, that plays a very important role, obviously, because it avoids the full impact or economic impact of the health crisis on the public, which would lead to, well, this consequence or cascade of consequences. Because the economy is doing bad, well, companies shut down and the people can't. Well, it's just the health crisis becomes a global crisis, right? So obviously, all the economic measures that aim to support the economy are very important, and I think that at least some of the measures that have been decided by the government have been extremely positive in avoiding this crisis of worsening from an economic point of view, right? And it's not easy, obviously, to come up with the economic responses to the crisis, especially, well, when you're in live, right? But then obviously needs to be taken into account the size of the crisis, the duration of the crisis also, and this is when it is when the this is why it's so important to, let's say, have a global understanding of the crisis. Okay, thank you very much, Cécile, and well, for those of you on the chat online who are taking part in this roundtable, don't hesitate to ask your questions on Nantes forum.fr or on the dedicated pages of the website of the event. Anyway, do we have Jean Garrigues with us? Yes, I think. Ah, great. So in a few moments, we'll be back online with Jean Garrigues. There seems to be a problem with the sound. Jean Garrigues, could you please unmute your microphone? Unfortunately, we cannot hear you. We can see you, which is great, but we cannot hear you, which is rather unfortunate. Still no sound. Ah, here we go. You're back on. Good. Welcome. Again, Jean Garrigues. So, the question I had for you is, whatever the nature of the crisis, do crises usually turn out to be a crisis of democracy? Well, you see, every time we experienced crises, they questioned partly or completely democracies, right? So I'm not saying that we are in a crisis similar to that of the 1930s. A reference was made to that crisis at the time, which led to the appearance of various totalitarian regimes, right? Well, we see some kind of totalitarianism in Islam-led or Islam-based regimes, but I mean they're not really linked to the COVID crisis, right? So anyway, but all in all, we see that there is a questioning at various levels of democracy. So questioning about how we can move about, how we can work, how we can interact socially, and then there's also the questioning of our way of doing politics, right? Today's pandemic is, I believe, just one item of a crisis of civilization as a whole, you see? And I believe that obviously it has an in-depth impact on the functioning of our democracy. And we see with, you see the Nuit debout movements, and then in 2017 we had another movement, and then we had the yellow vests in 2018. All these are factors or items of a crisis of democracy, and the way the government has managed the COVID crisis adds on to these various items or layers of the crisis of democracy. See? And we see that all these issues we're faced with now are come as a consequence of the COVID crisis, right? But they're not only linked to the COVID crisis; they are parts of this, if I may say, ecosystem of political approaches of an approach to democracy which is just not working. And we see it not only in France, we see it in the US, we see it in the UK, we see it in Hungary, for instance. We see it in various countries. There is a crisis of democracy, which is not necessarily linked to one event specifically, but to, I believe, in any case, to a period within which the civilization is finding ways or trying to find ways to adapt to the global society. Jean Garrigues, do responses to crisis require innovation, digital innovation, namely? Usually what we see is that the crises are followed by innovation. Sorry, we are completely losing the speaker, so can't really hear what he's saying. This is the interpreter speaking. Completely losing him, sorry. Very difficult to... Jean Garrigues, sorry, you're breaking up. I don't know if there's a problem with your microphone, but we really can't hear you. Right, if you can hear me, what I'm trying to say is that every crisis has led to innovation. And we've seen this now with the COVID crisis, where we are experiencing, well, firstly, a questioning about the way we do health and innovation in the health sector. But not only, we also see innovation in the way we work, in the way we are organized at work. And I believe that innovation comes as a consequence of fact events. So you see, I was mentioning the rebuilding of a welfare state, a new way of doing democracy, participative democracy, as some people call it. there are various experiences that we can learn from or work on that we have in history, right? The crisis, I believe, leads us to rethink the way we live, the way we interact, and in the way, namely, we interact with the environment, you see? So I think it's always quite interesting to look back in time on how we used to do various things. If we look at the circular economy, that is an example of just that. The circular economy is just taking life back a few years back. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for that. And very sorry for the technical issues. Obviously, this is part of the virtual organization. Cecile Valadier. Now, what can we learn from the way we've dealt with crisis in the past? Well, as I already mentioned, we believe that the measures, economic measures, come as a consequence of crisis. We've seen with the 2008 crisis that it was probably better to act fast and to rebuild trust at the level of the private players, right, the private sector. And this is obviously what was done in many of the G20 economies. And so this is namely with the flowing cash into the economy, trying to support the households which were most badly impacted by the crisis at the time. And yeah, I think that obviously we can learn from past crises, but quite often we also see that some things have led to worse situations than the crisis itself in the way the post-crisis period was managed, right? So these taking examples from the past, right? So I believe that using all these lessons, we should be able to at least try to do best in what has been done in the past. All right, thank you for that. Now we're now going to move to the discussion from the audience. So once again, don't hesitate to send us your question, not innovationforum.fr or the Facebook page, Le Monde Événement. I don't know if we yet have questions come our way. Now is the moment, now or never. If you want to make the most of our guests. Now, yeah, we have many questions as I can see. What will the consequences be of the collective indebtment and the increase of the level of poverty? Are health crises going to be the introduction to a major crisis to come? Who wants to start? Well, I'll perhaps try to start with the level of debt. Yeah. The government supporting the economy obviously means raising the level of debt of the country. Now, what is the alternative? Is the alternative to just let the economy crash and allowing people to lose their jobs one after the other? We believe that it's well, perhaps not the best solution. So yeah, there is going to be a rise in the level of debt of states, European states, but not only. But we need to take into account also that the interest rates are rather low. So this is going to lower the impact on future generations, right? So this needs to be taken into account. And then the debt needs to be used and can be used to do good, to perhaps lead the investments towards smarter choices, if I may say, perhaps trying to have a more structural and long-term vision in order to perhaps bear in mind the threats that we are faced with, namely the climate threat. So yeah, a debt which would be constructive in a way. I think this is something that needs to be done in order to perhaps deal with this this growing debt in the best way possible. Jean Garrigues, sorry, you want to? No, I'm not Jean Garrigues, but Jean Garrigues, if you want to take the floor, please go ahead. Yeah. I believe that one of the issues of health crises is that they have a bad impact on the trust of people in their government, and this makes the management of the crisis more difficult, you see. In 2009, less than 10% of the French population was against vaccination. With the H1N1 management, there was a substantial increase of people opposing vaccines, and we see that now that the level of people who are against vaccines has not lowered below the 2009 level. So yeah, there is really a problem of trust in government. Now, if I may react to what has just been said, this is Jean Garrigues speaking. I believe that the big problem of our democracies is well that it leads to various extremes, if I may say, and historically we see that. Sorry, once again, the sound is really bad. We see that the management of the crisis is not the best it could have been. In any case, in France, it certainly has not been the worst if we compare with other countries out there. So, well, and by the way, we see that well, there are various social consequences to the crisis and the health crisis, and with the rise of unemployment, namely. But what is for sure is that a follow-up to the health crisis is going to be a social crisis, which could then lead to a political crisis. So we've, I believe, entered some kind of mechanism which doesn't look really too good in where it's leading us. But then I believe it is an opportunity for us to rethink our model, to rethink our democracies, and not only with regards to the way we manage health crises. We've seen that ideology, if I may just put it down to that, the neoliberal ideology, following the 1970s crisis and then the 1980s and 1990s and early 2000s, well, is now being battered, and people are now more keen to consider different ways of managing society or interacting in society or building society. So I believe that, yeah, we are entering a crisis or a cycle of crisis or an ecosystem of crisis, which is obviously going to question a whole lot of aspects of our society. And all these crises put together can lead to various solutions, which I believe will completely change or transform the links existing between societies, civilizations. And we've lost Mr. Garrigues. Jean Garrigues, we've lost you. Well, until you get back, we'll take another question. And one, namely, regarding how can society be involved in finding solutions for crisis management? Who wants to answer the question? I could perhaps try to answer the question. We believe that crisis management obviously requires the involvement of the public, right? And namely, it requires them to do what is asked from them, or required from them. If it comes just down to behavior, we see that people are always finding good reasons to not behave as they are required to. But well, this is one thing that they can do, namely respecting the various the various the various things that are asked from them. Sorry. Yeah, if I may react to this, we are in a society in which citizenship has completely changed, or at least the notion of citizenship has completely changed, and a health crisis, as we are experiencing, requires us to completely rethink the way we interact with people, and it's, I believe, has allowed us to better understand what main issues our society is dealing with, and it is, I may say, quite difficult to act as a citizen in a society that doesn't really know what citizenship is about or what it means. And I'm not only referring to the French society, right? I'm referring to all European societies. This phenomenon is existing out there, and I think we see that it is very important to find a way to deal with this issue. We see the various behaviors from people individually, but also collectively, be it at the level of politics, be it in businesses, be it just at the level of society at large. We see that there is a big problem, and so there is this, I believe, a fight which needs to be led and needs to be fought in order to perhaps find solutions to the situation, and yeah, we need to rebuild the sense of citizenship. If I may add, yes, please go ahead. Well, I believe that, you see, well, we have namely this issue is that young people are not really at risk, you see, in this COVID crisis, okay? But we need to reach them deep down in this notion of solidarity towards the elderly, right? And when you're working on the reasons why people are going to decide to vaccinate or not, you see that people are not really interested in the collective impact of vaccination. Well, by the way, Mr. Vatel Peretti, do you believe that people have learned from the COVID crisis of March in order to better deal with the second wave coming our way? Well, very difficult. I believe that the lockdown, which was decided in March to deal with the urgency of the situation, was just unprecedented, and we are now starting to understand the cost of this decision. And not only economically, we also see psychologically there is a huge impact on society, and namely with young people. So it's quite difficult to really understand the consequence at the level of schools, right, and education. So I believe that one of the main lessons we've learned is that we have to avoid as much as possible a second lockdown. I believe this is perhaps the main lesson we've learned from this first lockdown. We need to find a different solution. We have another question from internet. Are there new economic models, perhaps more respectful of the environment? Can they be a solution for society? I'm not really sure what this question means, to be honest. This is Cecile Valadier speaking, sorry. If we take lockdown, for instance, right, we know that lockdown has led to a decrease in greenhouse gas emissions, right, due to the fact that most people on Earth were locked inside their homes, right? Now we are aiming right towards staying within an increase of temperature of 1.5 degrees, and we know that we have levels of greenhouse gas emissions that we've set ourselves by 2030, right, which we need to deal with in the way we manage society, and namely when it comes to answering the questions about the impact of lockdown, where Patrick mentioned a few. I believe that generally speaking, the public authorities have acknowledged or are acknowledging that it's just too costly a decision to make. But then there's also the context of our society at large. I mean by this, the environment and the climate threat, right? So in any case, I believe we need to come up with a clear definition of what we understand by economic growth and acceptable economic growth. What does it mean in terms of redistribution? What does it mean in terms of how we can maintain a level of prosperity while having perhaps a more sober approach to the economy? Right, thank you very much, Cecile Valadier, for this answer. We have a last question, which is about the questioning of the liberal ideology. What other ideology? Populism? Central government, as in China? What about the risk to our freedom, individual freedom? Can democracies still be desirable in a world shaken by crisis? So several questions in this one. Who wants to go first?
I feel like understanding on the desirability of democracy in a shaken world, I think it is key to have room for debate. We don't have one answer for crisis with a very strong central power that would be autocratic to impose the one and only solution. We know that health crisis leads to uncertainty. We know we need to be agile, adaptable, to be able to surf on a wave that we have no control over. I think the democratic system makes this possible, this adaptability. We can question solutions that didn't work at a given moment, although they seemed right the day before. You know, I'm a strong believer in the fact that the democratic system is the one that makes it possible to adapt to a crisis and to deal with it. Mr. Garrigues, would you like to have the conclusion word? I would like to comment on what has just been said. For sure, democracy is undergoing an unprecedented crisis, maybe even worse than in the 30s, because in the 30s it was working hand in hand with the hope of the popular masses, the working class, based on a certain mythology. Today we have no hope. However, the idea of democracy is more strongly settled in people's mind, even in places where we didn't expect it, in countries that have a very short experience of democracy. So to me, democracy remains the worst system except of all the others, as Churchill said. But today it is necessary to have a reborn democracy, not only at the institutional level, given participatory actions of the citizens, but in terms of vision, the vision we have, in terms of the capacity to recreate, to adapt, as my colleague said. There's room for hope. Thank you, Jean Garrigues. Thank you all for your participation to this conference on understanding democratic crisis. We're going to give back the floor. Thank you, listeners, for your questions, and let's meet again.